Alright, Sanji not that thinking do I say that the YouTube the Samlo Tone, Samlo you are Danje, and the YouTube that Dunga said that the YouTube showing that down to him. That's some look chicky, Papang, Chepena, the Rimbaro Chepena, down on to get that Kichi Chibi Mitabares, she's not that they were top of Timbusio Mare, the name Zada, and to give a chicky that. Gewachima inata, Tarpata Temchiki Kovatala, Gewach Madrupna, Gewat Mother Pendomasa, Gewa to Pudus and Piga Samrostada, the name Gewa to Vetia, Ranchibo Mayimba, and the Semjet Hamje, Samje, and the Semjet Dewa to Patumito Juba, the Enza Semjet, Dewa the Temper shows and Big Jamakum, Semjet Dunga, Dawa shows the Nijiakum. Then Semjet Dunga, Jawa, and Digit Temba, and Chiggins and Pigit in Hassam to some town. Then the Dijela and Semjetam to the San Yoko to shows and Piggy, the judge Sem, Lucia Semja some town. Dijelia, die, and the Dunga Tata Kibi knew by the Sulu and Gemno Kunjusum Yores, if Gemno Kuguris and Pigeta, Demrochia. Then I answered Jimbata Sutina, Serva Zundri, and they come to the Sosuke, that you sit down. So that you see the Papeke, Goblet, Dubitone, Dusine, and some Dalo Jayadi or Dusine, Jayad embodied in the shares and Takasanda during sugar that does Chagorova.
Good afternoon. So to briefly recap the meditation that presented is that through recognizing first that it's only in dependence on transforming our mind that we will be able to achieve the state that we long for, which is a state of lasting happiness that is not punctuated by even a moment of the briefest of suffering. So therefore, focusing on our inner world, our mental world, and transforming that is crucial. The first step of this meditation is having recognized the incredible opportunity that comes with this life, then to recognize that it is impermanent, it is changing momentarily. Our death is certain, the time and manner of our death is completely unknown, but every moment that draws nearer. And when death comes, it is immediately followed by rebirth. And we cannot take our loved ones or our possessions with us. All that accompanies us into our next life is the karma that we have accumulated. Therefore, as our next rebirth and all the conditions within it depends on the virtue that we accumulate, the conclusion of this meditation is to bring us to bring about an arisal of a determination to utilize what remains of this life well. In other words, to accumulate virtue. That's then the foundation of the meditation. Then the main part is to recognize that whilst I have now seen my own situation with clarity, this applies to me, but to all other ordinary suffering beings. We are all the same in terms of where we find ourselves, in this precarious nature, blinded by our own ignorance as to our impending death and the possibility of falling into the low realms, and blinded to the need to accumulate virtue. Recognizing this, senses a love will arise for others. May beings abide in happiness and compassion. May they be freed of all suffering. We build on these two minds of love and compassion, wanting all beings to be awakened to the reality of their situation and to transform it. As this arises within us, a sense of responsibility to fulfill this, the ambitions of love and compassion arises within us to the point where we take it as our own personal responsibility. It's not enough to leave it to others, to help beings, to guide beings. I have to do so as well. So that's the meditation on the altruistic attitude. Thereafter, we once again recognize, right now I'm still very limited. I'm only coming to know myself well. I've yet to transform myself much. I have so much knowledge to still gather, and that will still need to be integrated. So I'm really limited in how much benefit I can give to others, and I see this in my own life. Therefore, I have to become more skilled. And the most skilled of beings is a Buddha such as Buddha Shakyamuni, a perfected being, someone who taught the unmistaken path to achieve a perfected state. I have to become a Buddha so that I can guide others to enlightenment. Here we generate bodhicitta, and we then generate refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Now, having set about the determination to become a Buddha for the sake of others, we engage in the meditations that will bring that about. And those were the 6 perfections, namely ethical restraint, generosity, patience, choice, perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. So these are the various steps of the meditation briefly laid out. To bring about mental transformation, it is essential that one repeatedly engages in this meditation based on an ever-growing accumulation of knowledge. How much time one has, this will vary for people, but whatever time you have, try and put some aside to engage in such a meditation every day.
Denigi Yamlin Jabala Dene and Anzo Sanje Kobanto Gore said that Denigi, that Sanje said the Yudan Jen Shenla Dune Yungure said that Dusinanga Samlon and Gom Jap Getusi, some of the Yane Yando Yane Yamsanya, Nuva Cherry Tangi Tangi down the Dene Tamala, and then I took a Tamje say, a unit Tamje. Tobio do dine sanje se de chagore se sanje ko ma chagore jisa da dine za da ngan khasan konjo sumyan na sanje konjo se chadu so so sanje konjo charu ko wa de sanje ko ba tumna sanje konjo charu ko dine za da du chen sanje tu ta dine tu ko re se de rimba de yin se de kesinga do rimba de shin ko re se de rimba du se je jina dina she bine sanje se sanje jumde de se de ya ne dangbo ne ko 중 주변에 상계 차야 말 알아서 나신 지발에서 그러지자 명모 유가 공로유가 되셔가 되게 동안 용어에 년에 당보에 지발에서 지자다 되네자 상계기 그런 게 지금 도시네 아니 지금 동아리 강아대 통신다 강아대 세탑 가르도 세네 심주 제제네 지상 강아세에게 탑람래 배수 제제 도시네 공검잡 되는 지금 가로 가와 몽보제 되네 공제 냠는 제발을 때네 아니 상계고 상계 소로다 지사 상계네다 상계 좀네 되게 상계네다 상계 좀네 그런 게 냠마 강아세에게 탑람되다 공제 냠는 게 림바 냠용이 하고도 바디 다 림바디 가나들이야다 상계 좀네 최송제 도수 제고도 제사 동아세야 삼로 되는 땅고도 검되는 야고도 되네게나 동아세 투고도 되네 검제나 안땡이 대화세도 톱투고도 세야지 또 제사 산요 코롱기 냠는 집이 검기 냠용 림바딩 안서 랍제 아니 랍제 안디 냠는 라바 나시 냠는 지겐라 망보다 상계 망보로 상계 사요래 안다데 잔주선 받아 되네 냠는 제셔바 망보요로 안디 나시 다데 가서 점리 나래 지 통쇼소기 바 망보요래 안디 나시 다 가서 이네 안 상계 손셔바 될이야 안 강도 지도기 가서 냠는 대하고 점거로 봐 제디네자 당한도 두시네 직도 상계 손셔바 지소 장제 두시 냠는 지 줘바이나 아니 가서 심려 주어티 유바디 소수기 되서 야야도 소수기 냠녀도 하고로 와 디네 어데 디네 전에 아니 지 야게 친제 아니 사요고 봐 토고 차고래 지사 베네 사요고로야 니만 냠네 진에 손 두신 줘와로 와 지사 다 코로나 저기라 냠녀 랍도 지시아바디 아 저기 람델이야 롭장시 줘베나 나 사요 좀내네 나신 차투에 여바디 차고로 와다
The stages of the meditation that I've just laid out, these are the same steps that one engages in order to attain enlightenment. And this is because Buddhahood itself is dependent on causes. And those steps of the meditation are the causes that are required in order to attain enlightenment, in order to become a being that has perfectly eradicated all faults and perfectly developed all good qualities. So this, through training in this way is how we all will become an illustration of the Buddha jewel. And the being that went on to become Buddha Shakyamuni, that appeared in our world as Buddha Shakyamuni, once, a long, long time ago, he was an ordinary being, no different from us. An afflicted, suffering ordinary being in whom anger would arise, attachment would arise, pride would arise. But in dependence on the accumulation of a number of causes, the being that would go on to become Buddha Shakyamuni applied himself ever more to cultivating the path that he would much, much later teach. And as he cultivated this within him, became ever the validity of that path became ever clearer, and he applied himself ever more. And over an extensive period of countless lifetimes of accumulating both merit and wisdom through training in the same steps that have been laid out here, he attained the paths of a bodhisattva, progressed through the paths and the grounds, and eventually became an enlightened being. So this, he trained then through the same set of trainings that he then was able to later teach to his students. He taught to his students how to train their minds to achieve the same perfected result that he did. He taught them the complete and unmistaken path based on his own complete and unmistaken experience. This is what a Buddha, such as Buddha Shakyamuni, is able to do. We still largely rely on limited experience and limited knowledge. But a Buddha, their knowledge, their experience is complete, it's perfected, and thereby is able to perfectly guide beings how to attain complete freedom from suffering and pain. So therefore, one can have confidence in the method that it will lead to such a result. And we know from biographies, so many beings have attained enlightenment in the intervening centuries. And even in our world today, there are many realized beings, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas amongst them. And their sole function to be in this world of ours is to guide beings like ourselves, ordinary suffering beings. And how to guide them? Exactly the way that has been laid out here. This series of trainings and how to train in them, that is the method, that is the technique. And that technique is what Buddha Shakyamuni, or the being that went on to become Buddha Shakyamuni, employed and attained his result, as did all the other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas between then and now. And they are training themselves in this way now and guiding others in the same method. So therefore, by relying on them, relying on their knowledge and experience, and coming and applying it to our own mind, thereby gaining experiential proof that the path is valid, experiencing it for ourselves, we will follow their example ever more, apply ourselves ever more, and we will attain the same results.
안디 내려와 안디 베데나신다 가지고 통쇼스 유바 가지 점리 가지 지딘베 나라 삼다비네 다가라와 베네 나서 로디어와 로스가 당보 로스가 미치기 수고로와 데네게 로스가 당보 로스가 하고가 미디 당보 아메지야 되는 거 로스 신경 말와 그런 게 내가 체지 그런 거 삼났다 제바지도 제대 두 제바지 삼다 제바지도 갑라 ane gazam jile ko lo di denis chen lo bargyo ba ko nye so ro ba chisa du chin je ba ko nye ne da ko rong gi nye ne ha ko di nyam nyo di xian le ya lap ye ta xian da gi ma chang ge jing jin de ne ya gi ma chin da ja sang a zo lo ge gang a na wu ne de sa ri ne ni ma sha wa ne lo ba ye ba lo ge be je de ne sal pha nam kal pha dra ye ba chunal pha zhe ye ba da lo ge de be je de na zo milia chik to kepen xiu ji be je xiu da ye ba de sue ru ba da di lo de dang lo gi jin jin sue de dang bo lo ha ku gan ji sue ru ba da 제자디 나번에 곧로 아메기에도 로 신교 말 고바지 야야 코로나 제바 심주지 가슴질 코로나 지 로디 덴디지 덴디 로 바그스베 고 직제당하자 하고 지 하고 요도 안 신교도 니 코로나 신교데 냠녀지 챤라라 안 덴디지네 챤다게 지 장와라 덴데 야기로 덴데 망부 차로와 배 지우지 배시 침부 차되어로 와다 아저 개바 망 로래 개바 망고여로 와다 덴에게 어디 나시로 상해 주면되게 냠렌지 코롱도 신 냠렌지다 빵다 차상 신소네 되네 바 냠녀도 챤다 라비도 되네 자가 개바 공부 루룹세 당 빠는 다와다바세 당 로바 아야데 올라서 되네게 개바 망고죠 안 되려야 고 제수 냠렌지게지 건주기 말라비래 냠렌지게지 베제 개바 라마 망고죠 근데 넥지 도신 당아주기 도신 냠녀지 당아주기 지게 이제 합 가세칼라 망고 나려 안 도신에 내 지게 지기 랍소속의 신교 냠녀 지기 랍제 내게 망고지 판도심을 차되게 돼 누시는 아주기 아주 내가 가리네 지버리도 와베네 로베세나 주사이나 지바레 되네지 멘비기 men주제다이네 당보 지기신 안데 말랍되네 냠녀 제도야시 들어와 차산디 지바로도 되네 심단에
Take an illustration to show a dependency in our own world. The first person to discover, or I suppose to discover, electricity, Benjamin Franklin, when he was born into this world and he was a little infant, he didn't know about the concept of electricity. And when he was a toddler and a young child, he would have had no clue as an illiterate young boy. But through study and gaining knowledge, and that knowledge based on what others, the knowledge others had gathered before him, and applying his own intelligence to that, experimentation again and again, using his own intelligence ever further, he discovered electricity. And the process of dependency continued from his time right up to the modern day, in that the modes of production and transportation of electricity, as well as what it could be used for, has been developed extensively. We live in this very technological world, which has largely been made possible by that discovery. And there's this whole stream of interdependence between then and now, in terms of people gathering knowledge, thinking about that, using their intelligence, and seeing if it's true or not through experimentation, and developing it further. And in this way, there's this whole web of results that have followed from that initial cause, and that initial cause itself came from its own host of preceding causes. And then we've come to the world that we find ourselves in now. And of course, the situation we're in isn't final. A number of causes are being created in dependence on this entire web that has been created, and the world in the coming years and decades and centuries will be radically different to what we're living in right now. So this is the same process that the being that went on to become Buddha Shakyamuni went through. And he was born with a particular set of karmic imprints, gathered ever more karmic imprints through gathering knowledge, reflecting on that. Continued in this process over an extensive time, became a Buddha, and then taught the perfect method. And that same system was continued, initially primarily in India. And there are many great pandits in India, such as Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, Shantideva, and then these faultless teachings spread throughout the Buddha's world, including to Tibet, where countless great masters too gained realization in the same way. Whether we're thinking of masters such as Lama Tsongkhapa or any of the other great masters, both then and present in the world today, it all came about in the same process of interdependence. Dependence on the imprints accumulated, conjoining that with the creation of new imprints through accumulation of knowledge and reflecting on that knowledge. Transformation of the mind comes about. And eventually, that process of transformation is completed or perfected, and enlightenment is attained.
Hadinma Tsongkhapa on the Nini Xinyang Gonjo Cheba So Ngela Beijing Ngarje Dipashak Lenje Domba Jeda Jeda Je Gansa Kewa Sanyu Gurung Ngos.
Looking at the 10th verse, every day, in addition to the above, make offerings to the three jewels, strive in virtue and the confession of past non-virtue. Henceforth, strengthen your vows and dedicate this complete accumulation of virtue to be a cause of enlightenment. Every day, in addition to the above, make offerings to the three jewels. Three jewels, of course, refers to the Buddha jewel, the Dharma jewel, and the Sangha jewel. And in addition to the above trainings, one can make offerings. And the point of every day is, as it says, repeatedly over a sustained period.
Jimbata was your ya control down ya and Lama down and Kindulia Chevo Chevo as a Shesu knew that the garden don't Sembariwa, Ma Shan, Semjelina, Rangas Milina, Robotics, Sosugi, Benjor on the Marconsul taking somebody, don't Sembariwa. Chizaya controlia, Pugin City, and Dala Shesu, Pugis, my Shesa ya taking some Jibar don't Sembariwa, Chisati, Jimbiniam, ya control Chop, Puidu, and the Jimbiniam Chagorwa.
The practice of making offerings is, as we discussed yesterday, the practice of generosity. So there are two different words used in Tibetan and English. We don't really differentiate them, but we could say, I mean, it's not used like this, but for the sake of the commentary, we can say that when one gives, one would give to ordinary suffering beings. When one offers to one's Lama and to the three jewels, so those who are spiritually realized, whereas giving would be done to ordinary suffering people. But both are included within the practice of generosity. So just to say, generally when one translates, the words aren't differentiated like that, but it's to match Kenda's explanation.
Diongor Chasawa, Chewapu, Diva Shava, Kawala, Chisu, Irama said, Chasandusian, the Benanga, you show of Shinada, so Jike, Ya Lange, Ya Control, Juencharo, Puyata, Medora, Puine, Chewa Puche, and Delia, and Jik Sosorangi, Jik Dembara, Jik that Jik to has your Dembaina, ya, and the Jik Chewa Puyata, Chasa, and Chasa, your word, Bene Nane. Sick to have a Lu can a chat or what chat seven, Chasawa shower, and just then Chasawa the choke, didn't see them by the Deba Chegorwa, and Dusine, the chicken, Dizuno Chili and Chasangi, Yamduroji Leumurwa.
It's a very common way that it's common amongst Buddhists that when waking up in the morning, immediately they will do a combination of setting out offerings to the Lama and three jewels, as well as setting them out and making offerings, as well as performing prostrations. And whilst doing so, we'll be reciting verses of praise and aspiration.
Zanda Denigi Puya de Gitting and the Gulong Carivors and the Shevanaji, Semjan Tamji to the Sanjokoban Topra show, they begin the Semjan Tamji Diyuana, Semjan Dunga the Jawa show, the end that Semjan Tamji Diyuana Chidui, Semjan Tamji to the Sanjokoban to which the in Samje, the names are Yakonjula Cho Puyas with the Nick Puba, Pubi, Gulong Dine Samdaji Puya da, and Pubina, that Chatseva, the Puba, the Shazan, and the Gawa, Yachimba Sanjokoban to be Kuchago as at the Dirwada.
And as has been said before, so it should be clear, what makes such acts virtuous is it depends on the motivation. The motivation that one would be encouraged to have is that of, I'm about to make these offerings and prostrations in order to accumulate merit to become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. All the virtue that I accumulate now and from now, I dedicate to this ambition of attaining enlightenment and helping guide all beings to achieve the self-same state.
소수게 삼로나리아 베 메도로시네 메도 바도 메바 유사다 메도데 메도 안데 직 남메치게 가보다 마보다 세보다 닝지와 데네기 안데 진당한 첨부 휴유에 선비기 메바자다 데네 지게 림보치리 세다 우다 데네기 림보치리 봉고 휴유에 선비 메바로 제제 푸웨네 데네 지게 곧 지게 야 푸예들 데네기 직 바도 메바 푸베게 안 수연함디 야 바도 메바 개첨부 사게 되지.
Skillful way to engage in virtue, such as making offerings, first is to the motivation as presented, this vast and powerful motivation for the greatest of goals and the greatest number of beings, so to perform the greatest benefit for the greatest number of beings. And then in terms of what one is offering, so one will be laying out probably rather limited offerings in one's room, maybe just one beautiful flower, and that's all. And that's fine. If that's what one can offer, that is fine. But in one's mind, one offers far more than this one flower. The offering substance is referred to as the basis of offering. So one can relate to the offerings that one is laying out, however limited or vast, as being just the basis upon which we are offering. So therefore, if one's offering a single flower, one imagines or visualizes limitless, beautiful flowers being offered. So in this way, and one can then also offer things that one is not materially laying out before. So the same flower would still be the basis. One's offering immeasurable, beautiful flowers, beautiful environments, the jewels, and everything of value and beauty one can be offering. So in this way, not only is the goal of enlightenment incredibly vast, but so too the number of beings be helped, inconceivable number of sentient beings, and then the scope of the offering being made, this is also vast and expansive. And in this way, an immeasurable amount of merit is created from what otherwise is just a very simple act.
Lenche domba jera che sede da ganjele dishida cheba puya suba gewala besuchi ne besuchi ore se adirwa besuchun zunri besuchi je gewa tupurese da dene ngarje diba sha sede diba sha ore je da diba da ganzo diba sha de nyama diba da ganzo diba je sha ba sosugi temba yore majen bare da chedele ina de gewa ngama diba ne diba je she ge mangbo yugures jisadi nyama diba sha ore se diba sha ore se.
The second line, strive in virtue and the confession of past non-virtue. The term strive then we can understand as making effort, but it can imply that to do so with joy and delight in one's mind, and with with concentration. Then confession relates to past non-virtue. So that's we can call to recall what one non-virtuous acts one has done in this life, and also those that one cannot recall from this and past lives, and these one confesses. And the way to engage in confession is through the presentation on the four opponent powers.
The Dangbo da samda de Dangbo dine samdang oreje dibasha de danga de dibasha ge da jine jikiha jike koncho sumya da dibasha ge na da Dangbo sosugi 당연히 디바시 소수기 디바샤바나 심지어 탐지기 샤시기 디바사게 차상 삼다제 다랑다 신 심지어 탐지 디바 먹보사요라 소소하고바에 먹보요라 하먹고 먹보샤 사요레스 지자디 디바사데 메티하고 주문도 된 너르레샤스 디바데 다야고 마레스데 디 너르 중시다 하먹고와지 안뇨모베 샤완도 사바레샤스 베데 디니기 디바샤데 배 너르 중도 선배다 지금도 선배게 교바를 기고를 예제 교바 삼당고를 예제.
The first opponent power can be that of regret. And its regret then is generated in relation to what one has done, either that one can recall or has forgotten, and also not just what oneself has done, but generate a regret for all others too, all other beings as well, for the non-virtue that they have also engaged in. Recognizing that whatever form of non-virtue one may have engaged in has come about for the same reason. Through the arisal of the afflictions, non-virtue is created, and certainly through their expression, thereby physical or verbal non-virtue follows. So here, regret is generated for the non-virtue that has come about due to the arisal of the afflictions for oneself and others.
안 마오바나 안 디바세디 자오기네 라한 지금이 선배게다 두치네 치말 지금에 있으면 dom심기야서 멍바나 다 자오긴 디바세디 충충시네 지금에 첨보다 최종 가르치는 자오기네 지금이야 선배게 삼당고를 해제래.
With the generation of regret, it includes the wish not to experience a ripening result. And therefore, one moves to the next opponent power, that of the power of the promise, where one commits to not engaging in non-virtues again, not coming under the influence of the afflictions again, whether the non-virtues are great or slight. One makes the commitment not to engage in such acts again.
데니게 삼다제 데네네 다 디바디 땡이 디바 심제 탐지기다 라다 신 심제 탐지 디바 제 땡이 디바디 샤기 삼데 디링에 다 미샤기 셈비기 아니 삼다제 다 뒤인데 겹율 마선나 주게 다 권조 숨 삼다메나 상예습나 데니게 권조 숨기 디른 권조 숨야 디 권조 디바 교배기 뉴바데 권조 숨 여러 세상 권조 숨케 삼지 디링에 디바디 샤기 삼제 권조 숨 된다래 뒤를 봐 샤기 셈비게 삼다 데데 유 땡기 겹세데 상기 권조숨 파데려 샤기 선배게 매바체 데네 소수라랑기 디버샤에 된다라는 지게 야 아니 지금 나로 그 매니저바이나 지거래 아니 아 지게 디버샤에 된다래야 아니 장주샘 공바이네 샘자탄제도는 디버샤에 대해서 디버샤에 선배 샘자탐지 상요고방 토벌쇼 선배 장주샘 공바 지거래 아니 야 지금 야 메네사나 장나지고 안 차체나 지고래 내가 가르치나 다 도시네 제베나 다 디바샤고 해제래.
So of the four opponent powers, the first that was mentioned is regret, the second that was mentioned is promise, and the third opponent power is that of reliance, where one is making this confession to the three jewels before one. So in reliance on the three jewels, one has recalled past negativities of oneself and others, as well as then promised to them that one will refrain from engaging them in the future, whether slight or heavy. And so that's the third then, that of reliance. And then one engages in the fourth opponent power, that of the antidote. And the antidote can be any virtuous act that one feels inclined to. So some will meditate on bodhicitta, and through the generation of the virtuous mind of bodhicitta, these past negativities are purified. Others will, with the virtuous mind's presence that have been generated, engage in recitation of mantra, such as the Mani mantra or Mani Padme Hum. Others will prefer to do prostrations whilst having these virtuous minds present. So this then is the fourth opponent power, that of the antidote.
Venerable Lobsang Dorje, the nature of conjolia Jiyunja Puya Namedo Puyan, the negative Puya Jelia, and that does generation to get the Shugesha Banajin, Simja Tamje, Diawada, Tango Simja Dunga, Jawa Shores, and be some Taja, the Simja Tamji to Nanga San Yoko Toba Shores, and be Janju Simja Samta. The Nissan that does that division, the nigger some Taja, Divisha some Tawena, that didn't to get around that share, Simja Tamji, that one in Tipa Mobile Sayo, Chesa dividing a Diringa, and a conjure Dundulia, Shaggy, Sempig, Yama Divasha, Noruresha, Timinu, Sempe Samta, a Diring dividing a Shaggy, Sempig, that the nigger sometimes Chinchin at our Tiba Chigime, Raya Chigime, Shalaya, Diva Majeg, Tapshila Chig, Tablam the Bezu Chicken, Sempe Samta, the Nezada, that Diring conjure that. The Yuba the some Taja, the Larian Chiman Chigme, some Niche. The knitting he kept you rang conjo, doing a choke as a Sanji, conjo to years and because some of Jet, Rangel Lamata, Sanjeta, Janju Samba, the public in each other the years and remember Jet. And the Dulayada to get many dungi, and the charts will be nada, and I just don't wash about some to song you don't wash up again, got it to a denic to enter chapu venada. The niggy doing nagi doing da, do get chapu and nibo did Divashag Yambo topsy the shower. Conjure some di, and niggas dingy topsy or you, ya Divashag dingy top. That changing a just our Jimmy and some did that. Lanchi Michi Begate, Larmi give it topsy or on Ducene, and Doshi Tammy and Duce Veneda, Divashag or Ejetine, Divasha to word. The Nigg Shaban and Diba said Yama Shaban, Diba de Shamatu, Meba, some other guy on my lecture. Says I shot too good hitch, the Sosuki, Sempi, Nubi Tone, Chicken Yaman Jabena, Diba Karasa Shabena, Ma Meba, Ma shot too good hitch. Says I Diba the Shabaina, and Kasan King and the Shubanashi, and Diba that it, Diba Yama Chiki, Diba Shasha, Chinchin, the Diba Majabaji, Sem the Domba, then the Diba Sharameva, and I'm going to give a chimala. Yeah, Nason get the debut of Kiora. She said, you debut me about an answer Kia Malaysia. And then the Gawaki was in didn't have that milky in Mother Shinki Sayomara, and Dewaja Yaki to go there.
So in the morning, when one wakes up, can set out some offerings with the water bowls or flowers or whatever, and do so with the thought, I'm laying out these offerings, and once they're laid out, I've now laid out these offerings, and through offering them to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, my Lama, all of whom I imagine as being present, and I do so to create merit that all beings may attain a state freed of suffering, and attain a state of lasting happiness, or generate love and compassion. And through this merit, may I fulfill the commitment, may I become a Bodhisattva, as may become one of the great bodhisattvas and strive to become a Buddha for the sake of others. So here one can immediately at the outset generate bodhicitta. Thereafter one can recall, but in this life, these objects of my compassion, sentient beings, I have physically interacted with them or verbally communicated with them in harmful ways. I've had thoughts which are also contrary to reality, thoughts of aggression and desire and so forth. These I regret, and so, but they have arisen due to the afflictions and been acted out due to the afflictions. This is also the case for others, and therefore they are suffering due to their own afflictions too. I make the commitment, so that's then the opponent power of regret, now the opponent power of promise. I will not act in this way again. I will bring an end to coming under the influence of the afflictions and acting in an afflicted way. And sorry, I missed there with regret, but I'm added in here. And I will do so that I don't experience the ripening results of that previous negative karma, nor that I add to the burden of suffering of others. And here we then promise, I will not come under the influence of the afflictions any further. So that's then the second opponent power. We had regret and promise. And thirdly, that of reliance. Well, that was originally generated earlier of generating the awareness that one's Lama and the three jewels and Arya Bodhisattvas are all present around one. So that that third opponent power of reliance was already generated earlier, because this order isn't fixed. One can engage in these four opponent powers in an order that works for you at a particular time. And then here one ends with the opponent power of the antidote. And again, this just needs to be a virtuous act. So whatever one is inclined to do, one can do. It can be confession to the 35 Buddhas, recitation of mantras such as Om Mani Padme Hum, prostrations, further meditation, whatever one is inclined towards. And in this way, one, through generating virtuous minds, purifies the contrary, non-virtuous minds. And here, if you recall some of what's been presented earlier, the stronger of the virtuous mind one generates, the weaker the previously accumulated non-virtue. And there is no non-virtue that any being has accumulated in this or past lives that cannot be purified. All can be purified. And it was mentioned earlier how through generating powerful virtuous minds, in particular, so that as to weaken the afflictions, the mere act of weakening the afflictions is sufficient to ensure that because they're not arising, those powerful negative karmic imprints on one's continuum will not ripen at the time of death, and therefore one will not fall into the lower realms. Even if that imprint is so powerful, it could otherwise lead to rebirth in hell. Through habituating one's mind to virtue, so that the afflictions seldom arise, and if they do, they are weak and they are not sustained. One can have confidence that no matter what one has done, it will not ripen into rebirth in the lower realms. And therefore, whatever non-virtue one has done, you can have confidence that it can be purified.
Kumeba ta yang chi paso ye jodi jwenga na di wa ne de chi ku yo ma yen che puse de ka yo ma ro de me ba ne de ne ka ple ya chi me ba ine ta so su gen chi yang chi na di wa ine yang chi de ne ye ku che de ne me ba ine ne ka ra sam dang so su gi dün de ya ne sangye rang ge lama dang nem gi de so so rang gi 지단 넘기네 소소라 가를 지기담 가르팅규나 라마지 대서 조어를 제시 안디다 상제 탐제 대유 선비게 소소 된데를 주유서 매바진 디고를 매바지 안에 매바지네 안에 소소라는 게 안에 연차다 매도다 안지 림보치리다 제 푸소소바 푸기 선비 매바지 안에 매바지네 안데 디링 안디데리아 셈제 탐제 디기 템바 동안의 자와쇼 데이터 셈자 탐지기 되는 게 산주고바 토바지기 셈비게 매바제 안디던달이야 셈제라나 셈제 탐지기 디바지가 사회 지지 노주제 제상 디링이 델리아 샤기 셈비게 삼다 안다 도시네데 데야 삼다제 또 소소한다 카드르시 주나레 마주원 아주디 데 곰겹션 디고다 소수게 셈제 탐지 산주고바 토바지기 셈비게 장슈 셈코로 곰바인다 곰바이나 된 디바샤바데 차고래 안디네 곰바이 제라는 지 어다 친친은 봐 자오기네 지금 디바샤 자오기네 지금에 선배 domsem기 dom바사 삼다 도시바이나다 고 지 두세 통통 지나래네 지고 잠니지 고미야다 자주 셈 고미야 차상 쪽거래 안에 지기 야 안디바샤바데 쪽거래 다 진짜 건조를 최고 부여야 돼 쪽거와 차상데 제 뒤지 통로지는 나래 양아주게 돌뒤지네 제 투여 위협받아 자고래
The key point I want to make here, but applies quite broadly, is that sometimes in an explanation it can seem quite extensive and it can seem like it will take some time. But in dependence on the amount of knowledge one has, as well as experience of that knowledge through prior reflection, one can become very skilled in engaging in formal practice in a variety of situations, no matter what is going on in one's life. So, for example, if one is traveling and in a hotel, one's not going to have a shrine before oneself. That doesn't mean one can't do any of these practices. Also, if one's life is in a particularly busy period, then it doesn't mean, I have now no time to do half an hour daily practice, so therefore I can do nothing. If one is a little skilled, one can can utilize the little bit of time or whatever circumstance one has, and still turn one's mind to the Dharma, regenerate what one has previously heard and reflected on. So, for example, if one's in a hotel where there's no shrine, or even perhaps if you have none at home, it's okay. Just call to mind my Lama, my Yidam, the Buddhas. They are present. The omniscient consciousness is aware of my virtuous mind. They are present. So here, it's already the first opponent power, that of reliance. One has called to mind the presence of the enlightened beings. And one can do this again, whether one has a physical basis, a statue or an image, to serve as a basis for this thought, but the thought can be generated in any situation. Thereafter, so that was the first opponent power of reliance. One recalls then confession, harmful or non-virtuous activities that one has done in this and past lives, and others too do, all due to the afflictions. So here one engages in confession, feeling the presence of the beings one is interacting with, and immediately then can engage in an antidotal power of whatever one is inclined to. So some will meditate, some will recite their daily commitments, some will recite some mantras. Here, these serve as an antidote because of them being done in the context of the four opponent powers. And then one can conclude with the opponent power of promise. So here you see the order is being changed, because the order is up to you what works in your own circumstances. And the power of the promise is the commitment, I will not come under the influence of the afflictions and engage or act in such a way again. So this process, I've outlined here in several minutes worth, can be done in this length of time or less. Independence, your prior accumulation of knowledge and reflection on that. One can apply wherever one has an opportunity, one can use that in this way to accumulate virtue and to turn away from the afflictions.
Dende dipa shawa, dende lanche domba, jeta chesene, lanche domba se deji shesa mahomba de jigme esme samtan. Du shene chai jik je ni je du shene dende shene, jen jeta se yara chugure ese, dende ke jeta ches. Du she gom jene dende, da tamadela gansa kewa sangi gyuru ngo sede da deni ke sosu ge da deni gom jap deni diba sha deni chobo pui deni ke kewa jesu iran je deni ke sa shebe kewa di an garshne semje tamje dondala an semje tamje ge don sangi go ba to bi gyur gyo sho se ngo ya sangi gyur ya ngo go re se ngo ja go re je semje tamje ge don sangi go ba to bi gyur gyo sho se ngo ja go re je.
And the verse concludes with, henceforth strengthen your vows and dedicate this complete accumulation of virtue to be a cause of enlightenment. So in the first line there, the manner in which one strengthens one's vows is through the training one's mind through the four opponent powers, through ethical restraint. Whereas one is ever more turning away from behavior that is physical, verbal, mental behavior that is contrary to one's vows. And ever more turning towards a behavior, in particular a way of thinking, that is in accordance with one's vows. So in brief, through this training of the four opponent powers and meditating on ethics, one's turning away from the afflictions and turning towards wholesome ways of thinking. So this is how one strengthens one's vows. And then, when one dedicates one's practice, one does so, as mentioned in the fourth line, so that all sentient beings can attain enlightenment. Offer this virtue that every being becomes a Buddha.
Gachimbuchi to it. The Semja Tamji Sanjo go to be Gurki or Shosada. Nye Gavasa Shaba Delatine, Semjan Tamji, never that Zembling is, draw Semjan, ne the part never Jew shores. Ne Naza, never Chow, never Jew shores. Nye Gavasa by Delatine, Gawa Digi, and Semja Tamji, ne never Jew shores, and educate more. The Neatic, Nye Gavasabati, Semjan Tamji, Locrons. Ben Guedan, Longe, Caraguina, Consolia, Twinking Cariona, Dene, Twinking Dubu, Gurgu Shores, and Ben Neba, Cashelia, Mango, Mengi, Twinking Guru Shores, Se Calaguana, Calaga, Twinking Rawash, Guru Shores, and that Dulugo and the Dulugu Guru Shores, and Jian, she and Denigate on the Care, who in a Denigi Gavasabadi, dead and tell ya Kondogi, Denigi Pandogi, Lonju Koran, the Gama DQ, Shores Beggy, and then over Jaguar, Chesang over the Kaze, Ma, Yaptune, and it's Dushine, and Semja Tamji, Sanya, Ni Semja Tamji, Sanya, go to be Jurgu Shores, and Denigi, the Moadi, Yachimoshu, Kaze, Yaptu the Gacheche, Yaptu Jaguar.
When I spoke earlier in the session about how to make offerings, I presented it in a way that one can make just a very simple physical offering, but through one's way of thinking, make it broad and expansive. And so too, in earlier talks, I spoke about how the way of thinking when establishing in the foundation meditations is to make our mind much broader, more expansive and far-sighted than how we currently live our life, looking beyond just immediate pleasure and immediate attainment of pleasure and overcoming of immediate problems, but looking beyond this moment, throughout this, to what lies before us and future lives, right up to enlightenment, etc. So making the mind far broader. And so too, when we come to dedicate in a way that makes one's mind broader. So don't dedicate just to one's own welfare, one's own happiness, that I may have a good day, that my activities are successful, etc. We can have those in mind, but go far beyond that. In particular, think of all sentient beings. That immediately is exceptionally broad, includes oneself, all sentient beings. That's incredibly broad. Then, the greatest of goals, that of enlightenment. May all sentient beings attain enlightenment, the lasting, stable happiness of enlightenment. And then one can also think of temporary happiness. May all sentient beings attain freedom from illness and pain. May those who require medical treatment but are struggling to access it, may they attain it. Those who are struggling to have access to an abundance of nutritious food, may they attain it. Those who struggle to have clean water, may they attain it. Those who are struggling to clothe themselves adequately, may they attain suitable clothing. Those who are struggling to gain a good education, may they achieve it. May all beings experience temporary happiness and utilize this position to come in contact with the Dharma, train in the Dharma, cultivate the paths in their minds, and attain enlightenment. So here too, through the way of dedication, same at the outset with offering, as well as what was mentioned earlier, develop your mind, make it broad and expansive.
Digi Sanjo Kobanto Yurju shows Molam Jabiodu, Semjan Tamji, some as a D, Kiwi, Zawa, Nubadi, Semjan Tamji, San Maji, Badu Pando, Nuba Yungo, Hejere. Then the Nigga gave it our thing as a Semjan Taja, some other Sosor Harangi, and Cedelia, Arazugi, Nena Samaya, Bashimion, source to begin. The Nigga did some Molam Javana. Cedelia Nena Samoya, Bashimoyaji, and Susuki Dunda Druba shows me one Javana, didn't say it sauce on it, didn't you got new sauce on it, isn't it? Bena Disiore, Anajuki, Chupobo Ganchik, Yovena, Gikasona Lushavene, Kasumagamba, the Chudi Dina, they called Zed Hadu Gorege. that just a member that to do a new church nimal but she saw to us then come to us mother have your marriage. She said she took but shoot provoke Jason and Lushaban, Jason Magam Bado Chu provoke the Jason and Ladigo. She said, Simjan Tamjik to know over and dinner check or it. Gawa the Gachimo Chagger, nobody bear, Junibu, Pando Jay, Nuba, Junibu Nigo, resident.
With dedication, whilst one certainly does dedicate to attainment of one's own temporary goals, such as health and so forth, don't leave it at that. Make your mind broad and expansive, like I mentioned. Because if one dedicates this virtue that one has striven to accumulate, when that temporary goal is achieved, the strength or the potency of that virtue is exhausted. But if one is also dedicating to the far broader goals, as I mentioned in particular, that all sentient beings attain enlightenment, that virtue that you have accumulated will maintain strength until enlightenment for each and every being has been achieved. And the illustration that's given here, and it ties to the analogy that was earlier on about the ocean. So if we think of a vast ocean, if we take a full glass of water and pour it into that ocean, that glass of water will spread and remain present in the ocean until the ocean itself is exhausted. So likewise, dedicating our little bit of virtue we've accumulated to the attainment of enlightenment for all beings goes into the same ocean of virtue which will last until each and every being has attained enlightenment.
Dharna Kedan Chiwi Du Namso Jibu Gishin Jibu Chiwena Jordan Yedulaso Gunji Luisa Lua maybe Chone Damchins.
Coming to the 11th verse. In brief, at the time of each of your births and deaths, you were born alone and you died alone. Thus friends, loved ones and so forth all fail you. The holy Dharma solely is unfailing.
Dorna said that Dilia Mangbuchi Ma Shu Savare, that Dor Dunima Chick Duna Shavana, that Dorna Kedan Chiwi Dusu Dunamso, Jibu Kishin, and the Jibu Chiwa Nasir. Chazang to Kiri Kable, so Jima the Kio Mare, Ska Kush, Punya Nyam Dole Mare, and then Jig Yenda, Gavishin, Sada, Deniga Kaya. So Lea Marches, so Jibu Kiaware, Jibu, Dona Kiedang, Chivi, Dunam, so that she do couple, so Jibu drive, Gidi couple, so Jibu or that I made on Maso Jibu or Mother Robert in Lea Mares. She said that she do couple, and so Jibu drive. She said that the Mashipara de la Danzuge, Jitobo Sada, and Jin Yedu Sada, and this Punja Sada, Jimangura Liurwa. She said, Gidi the chick mother Leo Mare, that she do a chick mother drive Mares. She said, Tea Gaya Chia Mares. She said, the Kiawada, Chivi Dunam, and Jibu Gishin, Jibu Chivanas.
Summarizing, or in brief, so looking again briefly at what has been presented earlier. At the time of each of your births and deaths, you are born alone and you died alone. So in every life where we were born from a womb, we alone came out of our mother's womb. We weren't accompanied by our loved ones from our past life, our dear friends from our past life, nor even our Lama. He too didn't accompany us out of our mother's womb. And likewise, in every life, when that life ceases, we and we alone travel to our next life. We left all our loved ones and dear friends behind, as did our body we had cared for so, and our possessions that we had accumulated and valued so. They were all left behind.
Drawdown Nidulaso, Gunyu Lewis, that Drobota, and to get the machine, maybe Ringlea, so Drobota, and Yeduda, Punjata, then it's Kayobene, there's a Shidu Kabla, like Kasankin Shubanashin, Yam to Tia Mares as usual. so kunji lu se jidan lu se de go da se jidan lu le ne go da wa ro chi li go re ina da de go da wa ra che ma ka don da gar se wo sen da nga sam na la ya da nga zu be shi da nga le bun jia yu ni du yu ro bo shu yu sam je de ne sam da je su su gi xi ya da je wa chi ma gi gal sam ma ta ba na de ne shi du ka bla Dini gyong go re she de, da di gyong go re she. She sa di su tia me ba de, lu si de, dini ki tia me ba za, andi go gyong go re se.
This is shown in the third line. Thus, friends, loved ones, and so forth, all fail you. So this word all for fail, we know it well from the Lyric teachings as incontrovertible. It usually has the meaning of being deceptive. But here it doesn't mean that our friends and loved ones deceived us, but rather that, as we have here in the English, they are unable to help one at the time of death. So in that way, if we, at the time of death, one is relying on help and assistance from our loved ones, they are unable to fulfill that. And if they are wanting to help, they cannot do so. So therefore, we are reminded here that any expectation or hope that we may have, that no matter how dear someone is to us, that at the time of our death, they will not be able to aid us.
Dan jodu sosu jibu jodu kala robo degi dejinya la yode robo degi an be sosu ya ze dong dang kawo xiujin da panyom de joya ye do da shi de ma zhou bai na jibu jodu robo ji ma zhou bai na de guo dang so chai ge roba deji go zo robo ji yin do da shi de ma zhou bai na an da ko lu a ro guo dang so chai ge ro o di nan xin re shi da ang zu ge ce de le ya ni do da sosu ga bo ni bo de xiu ji sosu ge zai wa xiu ji yue de bai na ya xi du ka bla di su ge Ping mare, there's a kitty, made ping your mare, Mabanza, Lu said the ping didn't she go.
If we have to go somewhere that is extremely dangerous, we'll have some of our friends saying, I really care for you, but you're on your own. I'm not going to such a place. Others may say, of course, I'll stand by your side. But on this journey, when the going gets a bit tough, they may well change their mind. So in this way, they will fail us. So we can perhaps understand the meaning in that way.
That lua may be chone damchi yin. That is a lua meba. Cho to Cuba de Carasne, to get dambi che nyamlen che de that is damche said to get the Shabanaji, Jamba Comiada, Ninja Comiada, Jancho Sem Comiada, and the Jige, Jimbe, Yamlin, Samnata, Chudum Gome, this just a Dambecherwa, Conjuston, Jabra Dambech, or the Cho to Cuba that is Nanzu Shidu Kable Pando Chicken, Cho to Cuba the Dires, that Dambeche de Pinkides, Lua maybe did not Lua Yomares, what Nanzu get Dada Nanzu gave each a semna, Kewachi, Kewasaba, Kablia, Kewachi, Kabla, Nanzu, that they knew the Yeti, Yobache, and that they Yueche and Sekewachi, that similar Galana, Tiki Yeti Bache, that thing on similar Yeti Bache. Nanzu Shidu Kable, the Kewadi, Nanzu Yum the Tugus, Tugores, Nanzu number Shepa the Kawato, but Yum the Tugores, the Lua Yomarco, the Jimashini, and Nanzu Kilo Yeti Bache, Shidu Kable, Yum the Tugores, just the Tugunza, or Lua Yomares, just the Lua may be, Lua may be short to your body, than be in him.
The verse concludes with, the Holy Dharma solely is unfailing. The Holy Dharma we can understand as of course being the teachings, but in particular the teachings that we have cultivated within ourselves. So this would be the whole range of meditations we've looked at, such as the impermanence of this life, refuge, cultivation of love, compassion, bodhicitta, generosity, ethical restraint, patience, joyous perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. This entire collection of trainings that we have cultivated within us, that is the Holy Dharma that will accompany us. In other words, all the virtue we have accomplished, that is the Holy Dharma that will accomplish us. All the merits we have accumulated through meditating on these topics and engaging in activities under their influence, This merit is what will accompany us.
On the name that I'm going to give you those Tarbada, Tamji Kimbo, go on, Chazan, Tobiaki, Gudita, Gawati, Gawat, Drupa, the Choto, you are dealer, how about your mares? This is the Ranzulia, Ranzuki, Norse, I think to get Benedict, Benjor, the Gisas Norse, Segura, Digare, Ranzu, Digi Dubiaga, Dondala, Sagorwa, Chazan, Dinare, Ranzu, Norgan and a Choto, you body, Ranzu, Digi Dubiaga, Choto, you body, Gawati, or the Gawati, Yash, Choto, you bodies. Bene Sedan, Chike, Kaladan, Sedan, Dulodan, Benjo de Yang, Norris, Casne, Tisu, Benazulia, Dunga Sedan, Ganga Sedan, Dunga, Digi to the Juguaza, Mazu Norris. Sedan Dinaneda, Sikivi Javan Yamlen Ched, Benet, Givi Javan Jam in the Chanshu Sem, Yamlen Ched, Dizo, and the Gawan and Norna, the Chodu Cubares. Chesa Disugi, Tedele Devaki Maze. Rang Dewa, Shen Dewa, Serapne Serapo, the Dingy Dewa topic, the beauty chagor, is that the Norna, the Choto Cubares.
In our life, we encounter many hardships and obstacles, but because of this incredible human rebirth we have attained, we have the potential to achieve something which is incomparable, which is supreme amongst all the possibilities that beings can achieve. So we encounter many problems and difficulties in our lives. And here, as we come to understand this presentation, we can understand how those relating to external problems in an unskillful way serves to impede our spiritual development, as well as strengthen our afflictions through relating unskillfully. And in this way, we can be distracted and our time can be consumed. On the other hand, as to the extent that we apply ourselves to what has greatest meaning, and we come to understand the Dharma and cultivate it, gain experience of it within ourselves, strengthening this whole array of virtuous minds. In this way, we accomplish something of great value. So on one side, there are many faults that or obstacles experienced in this life. On the other, there is a great jewel, a supreme jewel that we can cultivate within ourselves. And this is what we need to set ourselves on, seeing that it will never fail us. This virtue, these virtuous ways of thinking, will accompany us from lifetime to lifetime, growing in strength as we progress towards the attainment of enlightenment.
Dene inzada nga jugi de gewi jawa sashibe nordi ane kuma shorya ge samdo yo mare che mi kuma mi chodo ge sambige semje che go mare ane kuma shorya semje che go mare ane ndigi ane rada shenyiga la nyugire kanga che semje che ho yo mare che Gewi Javadi, Rale, Pinkere, Shingale, Rashanigale, Pinkere, and Rankaodona, Kesho, to Kema to Yasm to your marriage. So that it may be that Shala, Shanda, and Zuki Jalado, Manguchi, Yawapuida, Washuchine, Tisugi, but Layaki Yanga, and the Chutolado again, Yanga, Kumakuya again, Yanga, and Digi, and the Jenjin, Randa, Shenilea, and Mutumbas again, Yanga, and Digi. Gugi denigi tone rangi sole ningai mishana kuma go sole ningai ngore chesa denigi nga ju jida nga ju gyela sa dige denisi yungore te ani chiduye kya mare garele tarin go robene chasan ketuya deus mar kya mare chesa kale habore chesa nan gewe nyamlen jejibe gewe sachabe nordi 파도 키리에 강아요 말에 제래 제가 라비게 삼비게 sem제요 말에 안 미토로 sem제요 말에 안 디기 기회자와데 소소리아 강아돼야 돼 샬라 강아되게 되니기 삼례 가요 말에 제가 되니기 용고 말 용말에 해야지 제 되니 인자다 담비 최 노르데 초도 유발에 해야 돼 디송으로 와다.
So Genla is playing on the meaning of a particular Tibetan word. Nor, which can either mean obstacle or harm, but it can also mean a jewel. So here, and it can also mean possessions. So it has these three meanings. So the one meaning is the harm and the obstacles, which as we come to understand the Dharma, we turn away from. We put that down. And rather we develop the jewel, so he has a second meaning, of the Dharma within our continuum. And as we develop this jewel within us, it, unlike this other Nord, the harms and the problems, this Nord, this jewel, will never harm us. In fact, it will only benefit. And it won't only benefit us, it will benefit everyone that we encounter. And unlike, and now the third meaning of Nord, that of possessions which tend to be static and we may or may not take them with us, this particular jewel accompanies us everywhere. Whereas our possessions, sometimes we have them and sometimes not. And whilst possessions we always need to worry about losing or someone stealing, this particular jewel, so again possession and jewel, it's the same word, this particular jewel no one can take from us. And in fact, not only can no one take it from us, it is always accompanying us, it's always accessible to us, and it benefits not only ourselves, it benefits others too.
That divasha, the nigga gave Jawa to your doing has gave Jawa to the diva ranching or shadow or that donala to give Penang to give Tiba the Gaoyores in a another Subuli or in the Kawa, the Diva the Gaoyores in the Subunala Yorbes and the Anti Mer, what a Subula met. That Kawa Yungures in the Kawati, also Sem Nala, Semgi thing to Yungor that. She's on the Semgi ten was an angle to Gawa to the Penny Shuguroji, Lombard, Shuguroji, Chudron and Lombachanura. That is do Nimalakam, Nimapa, then to go to so come to the Chudi, Shugu, you can Chudipa, Shudilia, Dread, Church, Lady, and Shugunal, you can down Lombardipa, Rimgi to come to Gorova. On dinner, she, the Diva there, as a Sabeka, Kawas, and the Simit and the Leongre, Gavadia, Sabeka, Kawalias, and the Simit and the Leongre. Since the dinner ends on. 저기 개와 같이 망하사베네 세미딩이 디베드파 누부춘춘춘춘주고래 슈롱바 니말 감바다 지바래 니마까지 차서도도 아니 슈우드바 롱바디 춘춘춘주고라 디나싱아도 개와 망 같이 망하사베네 아니디 셈기 디베드마 춘춘주고라 지나 디베 춘춘주고래 제로.
In the session we've spoken about purification. And a point to make here, you remember in the Four Opponent Powers there's one of the antidotes, and it was said a couple of times that any virtuous activity that one is inclined to can serve as the antidote to negativities. And this is because virtue naturally purifies negativities. So, and why is that? So if we ask ourselves, where is virtue and where are negativities to be found? They're not any part of our body. They cannot be found within our body. They're not some atom or particle within our body. Rather, they are found within our consciousness. Both negativities and virtue are found within our consciousness. We can liken this to a piece of paper that becomes wet. We place it in the sunlight, and slowly the water will evaporate, and the piece of paper will slowly dry, and eventually it will become dry again. So this then is likened to our continuum, our consciousness. So our consciousness has both non-virtuous and virtuous imprints on it, and as the virtuous side grows and strengthens, the non-virtuous side weakens. Like the old-fashioned scale, as we put more weight on the one side, the other side becomes less influential. So too here, as we strengthen our virtuous ways of thinking, we become ever more now the synonyms for meditation, habituated, familiarized to these virtuous ways of thinking, and thereby ever less habituated to the non-virtuous ways of thinking. And we experience this purification by our mind naturally now being more inclined to virtue. So this is how virtue naturally purifies non-virtue.
그래서 상기기 셈 탐치게 남체세 셈기 라신다 아우스 셈기 라신이라 지부지게하래 개발가요 말해지래. 당 아우스 셈데 개발을 가르쳐 왔으네. 아우스게 셈데려 뇨모보 망보지기 베네 되차당 콘로당 뇨모바제 디기 뇨모바 사번제 바차제 데네 망보지기 둠샤제 아니 그 니글마소나 깝샤제 통마투와로시 바 구교단에 매바로지 바 타 담제네 구교단에 매바로지 차되거라. 제자데 뇨모바데 되샤 콘로 나제 뇨모바제 디기 사번디 파샤 데네디 바차제 데네 망보지기 둠되어바치세 상지게 셈디 단 뇨모바디 파 매바서 지 바세 사번네 매 바세 차상 매바서도 장장냐로시 장장냐로시 베네 셰고로지 베네 시르로 베가가제 지부지기야지 여바지라 직디파 레다 쪽바다디 마 담제 직디가야 지 마담 코 장장냐 샤바네 직디 세우 슈제 베네 레 나로 이게네 세우 슈주어데 칠로 담제 세우 통고 쪽바시 통고로 지자 상지게 셈디 뇨모바 바세서 장무수에 차결로다 당하도 셈게를 하신데 장무장자 레데 다 디바라들이야 뇨모바다 되차도 콘로 사번님 바바 차상 지 dumdewa yinza jesa semgi di 장무수마도 데네자다 장무수데 기회 삼로 파 슈처처 땅에도 데네 뇨모 베릭디 파 rak바디 파파파 추르 데네마 녀가 주게 자주 셈고미야다 도마니 도베로디 야 띵이징기 파 공고 제데 데네 셈 뇨모바디 파파자 데네 당보 뇨모봉 로보와디게 파 운주와디게 파 메바자 데네 메바차이데 데네 간sam자 사번디게 메바자 데네 사번디 메바차 갈 간sam직 다 야보라 차이모로와 데네 바차되스 바차디게 파 메바서 데네 메바서가는 장마차고래 제가 데네 자 단다 저이게 라신라 상이게 심게 라신에 아주 심게 라신 켜봐가요 말 이네 당아주도 뇨모베기 뇨모 바차 사번이 뿡데데 파장모서야 돼 개회냠내 자주 셈곰 데네 잠니지 자주 셈곰이야다 데네 직지메냠내 데네 동방이 또 베셔라 냠내지 데네 냠내제 발라 데네 셈디 반마소는 슈처셔 뉴바처셔 당제 고 매바서 거야데 두스차바이나 데네 나진다 상이고바 토구리 에세지 상이 차도고 데 상이다 지바차고로와.
In the discussion on purification, it's also important to know that the nature of the mind of a Buddha, which is perfectly purified, perfectly perfect, or the mind of the Buddha, which is perfectly purified and perfectly, all good qualities have been perfectly developed. The very nature of the mind of the Buddha and the nature of our own minds is identical. Identical. So right now, the nature of our mind and the nature of the mind of each and every Buddha is identical. However, we are not Buddhas, and the difference is that our mind is obscured. It's obscured by our afflictions such as anger, attachment, pride, jealousy, and so forth. So this pure nature of the mind is obscured by these afflictions. There's the seeds of the afflictions, the imprints of the afflictions. The way that one can think about it to get a visual image is as something that has been covered by layers of dirty cloths. And as those cloths are layer by layer removed, eventually the nature of the mind will shine through, and eventually all those cloths will be gone, and one will be left with the pure nature of the mind. And the method for removing these layers is the accumulation of virtuous minds. And a wide number of these minds have been mentioned. Many of them are preliminary, but the most powerful ones, or foundational, but the most powerful ones that are built on that foundation will be the mind of bodhicitta, as well as the actual antidote to all the afflictions, their seeds and imprints, the wisdom realizing emptiness, and in particular these two minds being conjoined with single-pointed concentration. The single-pointed concentration gives the mind of bodhicitta incredible power. And this powerful mind, when conjoined with wisdom, is incomparable. And thereby, the practitioner can cut away at those layers that are obscuring the nature of the mind. And slowly, through continuous cultivation of knowledge and meditation on that knowledge, the virtuous minds grow, the afflictions start to waste away. The afflictions and eventually their seeds are eradicated and liberation from suffering is attained. And all that's left are the imprints or the stains of the afflictions. And eventually they too are purified completely through the ever-growing strength of the virtuous minds, and then the omniscient consciousness of a Buddha is attained. That is how every Buddha progressed, and it's how all sentient beings too will progress and attain their own enlightened state. Then thank you very much. Then for this afternoon, we'll conclude here too. Thank you.